The midday sun blazed down like an unforgiving verdict upon the beaches of Marbella. Heat waves shimmered through the air, making reality itself tremble, as if the world were nothing more than a mirage in this desert of privilege that surrounded the Spanish coast. The sand burned beneath bare feet, transforming into tiny crystals of fire that punished every step. In this setting of brutal contrasts, where luxury and poverty coexisted separated by mere meters of blue ocean, two destinies were about to collide in the most unexpected way. But before you dive into this story that will change your perspective forever, I need to ask you something crucial. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what's about to happen could transform not just the lives of these characters, but also your way of seeing the world. This isn't just any story. It's a mirror where you'll see reflected the true essence of human nature. Amina walked along the shoreline with tired but determined steps, her dark feet sinking into sand that rejected her with its scorching heat. Her weathered hands held a worn plastic bucket, where seashells chimed like tiny bells of survival. Each shell represented a few cents, each cent a hope to feed her family. Her skin glistened with sweat under the merciless sun, but her eyes black as night, held a dignity that not even the cruelest poverty had managed to break. She wore a faded white tunic that fluttered in the sea breeze, like the flag of a silent resistance against a world that seemed to have forgotten her. In the distance, floating on the crystal waters like a palace above the clouds, the yacht Emperor gleamed with golden reflections. Its 60-plus meters of length cut through the horizon like a blade dividing reality into two irreconcilable worlds, those who had everything and those who fought for the crumbs. The encounter of destiny. Amina's life. When poverty cannot break the soul. In a small house with cracked walls, located on the outskirts of Marbella where tourists never ventured, Amina had awakened at dawn like every day for the past 5 years. Her mother, Fatima, was coughing in the adjoining room with that dry, persistent cough that had worsened since they lost their health insurance. "My daughter," Fatima murmured with a broken voice, "today I won't be able to accompany you to the beach. My joints ache terribly." Amina approached her mother and caressed her feverish forehead. At 50, Fatima looked 70. The deep wrinkles on her face were maps of suffering, but also of a strength inherited from generations of women who had learned to flourish in barren soil. "Rest, Mama. Today I'll find special shells, you'll see. The sea whispers it to me every morning." It was a lie. Amina knew the best shells were taken by early rising collectors, those who had bicycles or motorcycles to reach pristine spots first. But lying with hope was sometimes the only gift she could give her mother. In the tiny kitchen, she prepared an herbal tea from wild plants she had gathered the previous week. There was no money for medicines, but the field herbs held healing secrets her grandmother had taught her. "Nature never abandons its children," she used to say. "It just forgets them for a while." Her younger brother, Yusuf, barely 12 years old, had left school the previous month to work at the fish market. Every morning he departed with a forced smile, carrying boxes that weighed more than he did. His small hands already showed the marks of work that stole childhood in exchange for survival. "Amina," he had told her the night before while counting the day's coins, "the stall owner says if I work well, he'll give me permanent work, but I need new shoes. These no longer protect me from the ice." Amina had looked at her brother's shoes, more holes than leather, more hope than protection. That night she had cried silently, not for them, but for a world that forced children to grow up too fast. Alejandro's golden cage. While Amina walked toward the beach with her bucket of survival, 3 kilometers from the coast, Alejandro Montalban awakened in the main suite of the Emperor with the emotional hangover of another empty night. At 35, Alejandro had inherited a real estate empire valued at over 500 million euros. Hotels, shopping centers, luxury buildings. His name was engraved in golden metal throughout the Costa del Sol. But that morning, looking at himself in the Carrara marble bathroom mirror, he saw only a stranger dressed in success. The previous night's party had been like all the others. Dom Perignon champagne, beluga caviar, empty conversations about investments and exotic travels. Isabel, his fiancée of 5 years, had shone as always among the guests, perfect as an expensive porcelain doll. "Darling, she had whispered in his ear while they danced. "Daddy says if we close the deal with the Russians, we can buy that island in Greece. Imagine, our own private island." Alejandro had smiled automatically, as he had learned to do since childhood at his family's social events. But inside, a voice that had been silenced for years began to scream, "And then what? Another island? Another yacht? Another decade of conversations about money?" That morning, after bidding farewell to the last guests who left in their Ferraris and Lamborghinis, Alejandro had felt lonelier than ever. His penthouse in Madrid, his chalet in Switzerland, his apartment in Paris. He had homes around the world, but none felt like home. "I need to swim," he told himself, putting on designer swimwear that cost more than many families' monthly salary. "I need the sea to wash away these thoughts." The rescue that would change everything. The water was perfect that morning. Alejandro swam with powerful strokes, moving away from the yacht, seeking in physical exercise the mental silence he couldn't find anywhere else. The sun beat down on his tanned back, and for the first time in weeks he felt present. But the Mediterranean Sea held surprises that day. An underwater current, invisible but powerful, began pulling him toward the open sea. At first, Alejandro didn't notice. He was accustomed to swimming long distances in heated pools, but the open ocean followed different rules. Nature didn't respect fortunes or surnames. When he finally lifted his head to orient himself, the yacht looked like a toy in the distance. His heart began beating with an intensity he hadn't known since childhood, when fear was still an emotion permitted in his world of privileges. "Help!" he shouted, but his voice was lost in the blue immensity. For the first time in his adult life, Alejandro Montalban felt truly vulnerable. Money couldn't buy air for his lungs that were beginning to fill with salt water. Influential contacts couldn't stop the waves that pounded him mercilessly. From the shore, Amina had been watching the scene with growing concern. Her years working on the beach had taught her to read the sea's signals like reading an open book. She had seen how the elegant swimmer moved farther and farther away, had noticed the exact moment when his strokes changed from controlled to desperate. Without hesitating for a second, Amina dropped her bucket of shells. The small marine treasures scattered across the burning sand like mother-of-pearl tears. But at that moment they didn't matter. A human life was worth more than all the ocean's treasures. She plunged into the water fully clothed, her white tunic becoming a second skin that helped her cut through the waves. Amina had learned to swim in these same waters as a child, when they could still afford leisure days. The sea was her childhood friend, and that morning she asked it for the most important favor of her life. "Give me strength," she murmured, while swimming toward the figure struggling against the waves. Not for me, but for him. The distance seemed eternal. Her arms began to ache, her lungs to burn. But Amina pressed on, driven by something more powerful than personal survival. Pure compassion. When she finally reached Alejandro, he was semi-conscious, with purple lips and glassy eyes. Without words, Amina wrapped her arm around him and began the most difficult return of her life. Each stroke was a victory over the ocean that seemed to claim its prey. "Hold on," she whispered in his ear. "The shore is close. Don't give up now." Alejandro, between consciousness and fainting, felt that voice like an anchor connecting him to life. He didn't understand the Arabic words Amina mixed with Spanish, but he perfectly understood the determination that vibrated in every syllable. When they finally touched dry land, both collapsed on the sand. Amina coughed salt water until her lungs cleared, while Alejandro remained motionless, breathing as if each inhalation were a newly discovered miracle. The first tourists passing by the beach had approached, some recording the dramatic scene with their phones. But for Amina and Alejandro, the world had reduced to that moment. Two strangers united by an act of bravery that neither would ever forget. "Thank you," Alejandro murmured when he could finally speak, looking into the eyes of the woman who had given him back his life. For the first time in decades, his voice trembled with real emotion. "You saved my life." Amina looked at him with those deep eyes that had seen too much suffering for her age, but still held an unbreakable spark of hope. "The sea doesn't distinguish between rich and poor," she replied simply. "Everyone deserves a second chance." Those words pierced Alejandro's soul like arrows of truth. For the first time in his life, Someone had helped him without knowing his surname, without knowing how many zeros were in his bank account. She had saved him simply because he was a human being in danger. Opposite worlds. The encounter of gratitude. 3 days after the rescue, Alejandro couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had saved his life. He had discreetly asked about her in the area and had discovered that her name was Amina and that every day she walked the beach looking for shells to sell. That information had caused him a strange mixture of shame and admiration. While he wasted thousands of euros on superficial parties, she risked her life for cents found in the sand. I have to thank her properly, he told himself, dressing in casual clothes that still screamed money from every pore. Ralph Lauren polo, Italian linen pants, handcrafted leather boat shoes. He found her at dawn, when the beach was still deserted, and seagulls claimed their territory before tourists arrived. Amina walked along the shore with her usual bucket, but something had changed in her posture. She seemed more tired, more worried. "Good morning," Alejandro greeted her, approaching with cautious steps. He didn't want to frighten her. Amina looked up, surprised. For 3 days, she had thought about the man she had saved, wondering if it had been just a dream or if she had really risked her life for a stranger. "It's you," she murmured, with a smile that lit up the beach better than the sunrise. "How do you feel?" "Alive, thanks to you," Alejandro replied, and for the first time in years, he smiled with complete sincerity. "I've come to thank you as you deserve." He pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. Inside were 10,000 euros in 500 euro bills, more money than Amina had seen together in her entire life. "This is for you and your family. I know there's no money in the world that can pay for a life, but I want you to know that—" "No," Amina interrupted with firmness that surprised them both. "I can't accept it." Alejandro blinked, confused. In his world, everything was solved with money. Every problem had a price, every favor a fee. "I don't understand. Isn't it enough? I can—" "It's not about the amount," Amina explained, walking toward the water where waves died gently on the sand. "It's because I didn't save your life for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Alejandro followed her, intrigued by a philosophy that clashed against everything he had learned in his 35 years. "But your family, surely they need—" "We need many things," Amina admitted, looking at the horizon where the sun began painting the sky in impossible colors. "But we don't need charity. We need opportunities." "What's the difference?" Amina turned toward him, and Alejandro saw in her eyes a wisdom that wasn't learned in expensive universities or boardrooms. "Charity feeds for a day. Opportunity teaches fishing for a lifetime. You give me money, I spend it, it's gone, and we remain the same poor woman and rich man we were before. But if instead of giving me money, you gave me the opportunity to work with dignity—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Alejandro understood perfectly. In his world of privileges, he had forgotten that something more valuable than money existed: human dignity. "What did you work at before?" he asked, putting away the envelope. "I was a children's teacher," Amina replied with nostalgia. "I taught at a small school until they closed it for lack of funding. The neighborhood children were left without education, and I was left without work. Since then—" She gestured toward her bucket of shells, a sad smile adorning her lips. "Would you like to teach again?" "It's my dream," Amina confessed, with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "But private schools don't hire women like me, and public ones have no budget." Alejandro nodded slowly. For the first time, he began to understand that the problem wasn't lack of individual money, but an entire system that denied opportunities to valuable people for absurd reasons. "Would you come to lunch with me?" he asked impulsively. "I'd like to know your story better." Amina looked at him with distrust. In her experience, when rich men invited poor women to know their story, they generally had intentions that didn't include conversation. "Don't misunderstand me," Alejandro added quickly, reading her expression. "I just want to understand. All my life I've lived surrounded by luxuries, but I've never met someone like you. Someone who what? Someone who is truly rich," he finished, surprising himself with the truth of his words. Humiliation at the elite club Alejandro took her to the Marbella Yacht Club, a place where he had lunched thousands of times with partners, clients, and Isabel's suitors. It was familiar territory where he felt safe, where his surname opened all doors. But that afternoon he would discover that familiarity can become poison when seen with new eyes. "Mr. Montalban," the maitre d' greeted him with the rehearsed smile of one who recognizes generous wallets. But when his eyes fell on Amina, the smile froze. Amina had done her best to look presentable. She had put on her only decent dress, a navy blue one she had bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. She had braided her hair carefully and put on the small silver earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. To any normal person, she looked elegant and dignified. But at the Marbella Yacht Club, normal didn't exist. "Mr. Montalban," the maitre d' murmured confidentially, "I'm afraid we have a rather strict dress code." Alejandro's face hardened. For the first time, he was seeing his world from the outside, and the view was disgusting. "What problem is there with her attire?" he asked with a tone inherited from generations of men accustomed to their questions being orders. "Well, it's just that it's not exactly what we expect from the companions of our members." The word companions floated in the air like a slap. Amina felt shame ignite her cheeks, but kept her head high. She had endured worse humiliations, but never in the presence of someone whose opinion had begun to matter to her. "Excuse me for a moment," Amina said with dignity, heading toward the door. "Wait!" Alejandro shouted, but she had already left. He found her in the parking lot, breathing deeply the salty air that came from the harbor. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. "I'm sorry," Alejandro told her, and for the first time in his life the weight of an apology physically hurt him. "I had no idea that—" "Yes, you did," Amina interrupted softly, without reproach in her voice. "You knew exactly what your world is like. You just had never seen it from this side." Alejandro sat on a bench facing the sea, and after a moment, Amina joined him. The contrast was perfect. Behind them, the elite club with its marble facades and crystal prejudices. In front, the infinite sea that knew nothing of social classes. "Tell me about your mother," Alejandro said suddenly. Amina looked at him surprised. "Why do you want to know about her?" "Because when I spoke to you about opportunities, I saw pain in your eyes. And because I think if I'm going to understand who you really are, I need to know the people you love." For the next hour, Amina told him about Fatima. She told him how her mother had worked cleaning houses of wealthy families for 30 years, saving every euro to pay for her children's education. She told him how she had lost her job when she got sick, and how the health system had abandoned them when they needed it most. "She has diabetes," Amina explained, watching the seagulls gliding over the waves. "She needs insulin, but it costs over 200 euros a month. So, we ration it. Some days she skips doses to make it last longer." Alejandro felt something break in his chest. That same week, he had spent 500 euros on a bottle of whiskey he hadn't even finished. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you asked," Amina replied simply, "and because I think you're the first rich person who really wants to hear the answer." Seeds of change. That night, Alejandro couldn't sleep. He stayed on his yacht's deck, looking at the lights of Marbella that sparkled like a diamond necklace over the coast's darkness. But for the first time, those lights didn't seem beautiful to him. They seemed accusatory. He thought about Amina walking back to her humble home, where her mother waited with untreated diabetes, and her little brother worked instead of studying. He thought about the club's maitre d', about his smile that had evaporated before someone who didn't have the right dress code to be considered human. He thought about himself, about the thousands of euros he spent without thinking, while kilometers away, an entire family struggled to survive with dignity. For the first time in decades, Alejandro Montalban felt ashamed of his fortune. The next day, he appeared on the beach before dawn. Amina was already there, of course, beginning her daily search for shells. But that morning she carried something different in her eyes, a determination Alejandro hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," he began, "about opportunities instead of charity." Amina stopped looking for shells and looked at him attentively. "And?" "I want to create a school," Alejandro said, the words pouring out of him as if they had been waiting their whole lives to be spoken. A real school, where children like your brother can study instead of work. And I want you to run it. Amina straightened slowly, as if the words needed time to reach her brain. Are you serious? I've never been more serious in my life, Alejandro replied. But there's one condition. Amina's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I don't want it to be my charity project, he continued. I want it to be your project. Your vision, your methods, your school. I'll just provide the money. You'll provide the soul. For the first time since they had known each other, Amina smiled with a joy that illuminated the entire beach. Do you know what that means to me? She asked, with tears of happiness running down her cheeks. I think I'm beginning to understand, Alejandro replied, and for the first time in his life he felt his money could serve something more than buying empty objects. But neither of them knew that conversation had been observed from afar, nor that news travels fast in Marbella's exclusive circles. Transformation, the secret of the insulin. A week after their conversation on the beach, Alejandro woke up with a strange urgency in his chest. He had dreamed of Fatima, Amina's mother, though he had never met her. In the dream, she extended her hand and asked for help, with a voice that faded like an echo. Unable to explain it to himself, he drove to the neighborhood where Amina lived. It was the first time he had ventured into that part of the city, where streets didn't have names on golden plaques, and houses didn't compete to be the most ostentatious. What he found left him breathless. The houses were small but dignified, with gardens where flowers grew that didn't cost fortunes, but filled the air with authentic perfumes. Children played in the streets with worn soccer balls, but with laughter that sounded more genuine than any guffaw he had heard at his elite parties. He asked for Amina's house, and an elderly neighbor guided him with evident curiosity. It was clear she wasn't accustomed to seeing luxury German cars in her neighborhood. Are you a doctor? The woman asked him. Because Fatima urgently needs a doctor. Alejandro's heart raced. He knocked on the worn wooden door, and Amina opened with swollen eyes from crying. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised, but without annoyance. I had a feeling, Alejandro replied honestly. What's wrong with your mother? Amina stepped aside to let him in. The house was tiny but immaculately clean. Every object had its place, and though the furniture was old, it was cared for with love. Family photographs and drawings that Yusuf had evidently made when he was younger hung on the walls. She's in the bedroom, Amina murmured. Last night she had a diabetic crisis. She fainted, and we don't have money to take her to a private hospital, and the public one has a 3-day waiting list. Alejandro felt a rage he didn't know. How is it possible that in a civilized country, a woman could die for not having money for immediate medical care? We're going to the hospital right now, he said without hesitation. I'll take care of everything. I already told you we can't accept charity, Amina replied, but her voice trembled between dignity and desperation. It's not charity, Alejandro said firmly. It's justice. Your mother worked 30 years cleaning houses of people like me. She never received decent health insurance, never had paid vacations, never had the security she deserved. This isn't a favor. It's a debt society owes her. Amina looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and respect that Alejandro felt like a blessing. Besides, he added with a smile, if you're going to run my school, I need you to have peace of mind, and you can't have it if your mother is sick. That afternoon, Fatima was treated at Marbella's best private clinic. Doctors stabilized her blood sugar levels and prescribed a complete treatment that included the highest quality insulin. When Fatima woke up and saw her daughter holding hands with an elegant man who had paid for her salvation, she asked no questions. She simply smiled. You're the man my daughter saved in the sea, she said with a weak but clear voice. Yes, ma'am, Alejandro replied, bowing respectfully. And now she's saving me in a completely different way. The heir's rebellion. The changes in Alejandro didn't go unnoticed in his social circle. Isabel was the first to notice something was different about her fiancé. Darling, she told him during dinner at Madrid's most exclusive restaurant, lately you've been very strange, distant. Alejandro looked around the restaurant. tables separated by meters of distance to guarantee privacy, waiters who whispered as if speaking in a library, artistic food that cost more than many families spent on food in a month. "Don't you find all this absurd?" he asked suddenly. Isabel stopped chewing her caviar. "Absurd what?" "This," Alejandro gestured toward the environment. "We're spending €500 on dinner, while there are families that don't have money for insulin." "Oh, honey," Isabel sighed condescendingly. "Have you been watching poverty documentaries again? You know those things make you melancholy." "It's not melancholy, Isabel. It's conscience." "Conscience?" Isabel laughed with a laugh like breaking glass. "Alejandro, we generate jobs, we pay taxes, we already do our part." "Our part?" Alejandro's voice rose in volume, making other tables look at them with curiosity. "Isabel, we spend more on one party than it costs to save lives." "Does that seem like doing our part to you?" Isabel set down her utensils with a brusque gesture. Her blue eyes, which had always seemed beautiful to him, now struck him as cold as icebergs. "I don't know what's happened to you lately, but it's seriously worrying me. Daddy says you've been asking strange questions at the company about social programs." Alejandro smiled bitterly. Of course, Isabel's father, majority partner in several of his businesses, would be monitoring his movements. "I've been thinking about creating an educational foundation," he said calmly. "Schools for children from families without resources." "A foundation?" Isabel leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Alejandro, foundations are fine for public image, but not for investing real money. They're decorative." "Decorative?" "Yes, honey. You put your name on a golden plaque, appear in some photos with poor children, deduct taxes, and everyone's happy. But you can't start giving away real money. What would the shareholders say?" In that moment, Alejandro clearly saw who Isabel was. She wasn't evil. She was simply a product of a system that had turned compassion into a marketing strategy and social justice into a tax deduction. "The shareholders can go to hell," he said, getting up from the table. Isabel looked at him open-mouthed. In 5 years of relationship, she had never heard Alejandro speak like that. "Who are you and what did you do with my fiancé?" she asked, trying to sound funny but with real nervousness in her voice. "I'm the person I always should have been," Alejandro replied, leaving enough money on the table to cover a dinner that no longer made sense to finish. "And you're exactly who you always were. I just realize it now." Confrontation with the partners. The next day, Alejandro called an extraordinary board meeting. The 5 main partners gathered in the boardroom of the Montalban Tower, a 40th floor with panoramic views of Madrid that cost more per month than a small hospital's annual budget. "Gentlemen," Alejandro began, standing before the window that showed the city like a map of possibilities, "I've decided to allocate 20% of our next year's profits to an educational project." The silence that followed was so dense it could have been cut with a knife. Rodrigo Vasquez, the most veteran partner and future best man at Alejandro and Isabel's wedding, was the first to react. "Alejandro," he said, with the condescending patience used with capricious children, "I understand you want to do something philanthropic. We all go through that phase, but 20% of profits are 50 million euros, Alejandro finished. "I know perfectly well." 50 million! Exclaimed Carlos Mendoza, the youngest partner, who had inherited his stake from his father and never worked a real day in his life. "Alejandro, have you gone mad?" "On the contrary," Alejandro replied calmly. "I think for the first time in my life I'm sane." "Son," intervened Eduardo Santamaria, a family friend since Alejandro was a child, "your father built this empire for you to inherit and grow it, not to give it away to whom exactly?" "To children who deserve the same opportunities we had from birth," Alejandro replied. "To families who work honestly but can't afford quality education." "That's the government's job," Vasquez grumbled. "We already pay our taxes." "The taxes we evade through tax havens," Alejandro replied with a sarcastic smile. "Rodrigo, last week you proudly showed me how to transfer profits to Ireland to pay 5% instead of 25%. The tension in the room became palpable. The 5 men looked at each other with the complicity of those discovered en famille. "Alejandro," Mendoza said with a threatening voice, "I hope you're not suggesting we've done anything illegal." "No, Carlos. I'm just suggesting we've done something immoral." "Enough!" Vasquez shouted, hitting the mahogany table with his fist. "I don't know what's happened to you, but this ends here. As majority partner after you, I propose we take a recess so you can reconsider this madness." "There's nothing to reconsider," Alejandro said firmly. "And as owner of 51% of the shares, my decision is final." "Your decision?" Santa Maria stood up slowly, his face red with indignation. "Alejandro, we watched you grow up. We knew your father. He never would have— My father died working 18 hours a day to accumulate money he never had time to enjoy," Alejandro interrupted with evident pain. "Is that what you want me to do? Repeat his mistakes?" "His mistakes gave you the life you have," Vasquez shouted. "His obsession gave me an empty life," Alejandro responded with equal intensity. "Do you know, when was the last time I felt proud to be who I am? 3 weeks ago, when a poor woman risked her life to save mine without expecting anything in return. That is real wealth." The 5 men looked at him as if he had announced he was converting to Buddhism and leaving for a monastery. "Alejandro," Santa Maria said with a softer voice, changing strategy, "I understand you've had an emotional experience, but business decisions aren't made with emotions." "Aren't they?" Alejandro approached the window and pointed toward the city. "Gentlemen, do you see those lights down there? Each one represents a family, a dream, a hope. For 30 years we've built our empire extracting money from that city, but we've never given anything real back." "We provide jobs," Mendoza murmured. "We provide poorly paid jobs in exchange for obscene profit margins," Alejandro corrected. "Do you know how much a cleaning woman in our buildings earns? 600 euros a month. Do you know how much my watch costs?" He looked at his wrist, where a limited edition Patek Philippe gleamed. 40,000 euros, 5.5 years' salary for a worker. Silence returned to the room, but this time it had a different flavor. It was the silence of those who hear uncomfortable truths they would prefer to ignore. "So," Vasquez finally said, with a dangerously low voice, "what exactly do you propose?" "I propose we remember we're human beings before we're businessmen," Alejandro replied. "I propose we use a fraction of our profits to create something beautiful, instead of accumulating more numbers in bank accounts we can't even count anymore." "And if we refuse," Santa Maria asked, "what will you do?" Alejandro looked at them one by one, these men who had been like uncles to him, who had celebrated his birthdays and taught him the secrets of the business world. "Then I'll sell my shares and create the foundation on my own," he said simply. "With or without you, this is going to happen. Night of decisions." That night, Alejandro walked through Madrid as he had never done before, on foot, without a chauffeur, without a fixed destination. The streets showed him a city he had lived above for decades without really knowing. He saw an elderly woman rummaging through a garbage container and realized she could be his mother's age if she had lived. He saw a young man playing guitar in the subway to get some coins and remembered that he himself had wanted to be a musician before family responsibilities steered him toward business. His phone rang constantly. Isabel, his partners, even some local politicians who had heard rumors about his philanthropic crisis. But that night, Alejandro didn't feel like explaining himself to anyone. He finally found himself in a small neighborhood cafe, one of those authentic places that resisted gentrification and where coffee cost €1 instead of 5. He sat at a scratched formica table and ordered a black coffee. "Bad night?" the waitress asked him, a middle-aged woman with a tired but genuine smile. "Night of decisions," Alejandro replied honestly. "The worst," she nodded knowingly, "but also the best. Depends on what you decide." Alejandro looked at her with curiosity. "How do you know?" "Because I've been serving coffee for 40 years and I've seen many faces like yours. People who come here when their ordered world is shaking and they need to remember what real life is like." "And what do you see in my face?" The woman dried her hands on her apron and looked at him with that wisdom that only comes from years of working with real people. "I see someone who just discovered that having money and being rich are completely different things," she said simply. "And who's deciding which of the two he wants to be?" Alejandro remained silent, stirring his coffee while the waitress's words resonated in his mind like bells of truth. "Can I ask you a personal question?" he finally said. "Sure, son. If you had 50 million euros to change the world, what would you do?" The woman sat in the chair across from him, something that probably wasn't allowed, but which she did with the authority of someone who had been the soul of a place for decades. "First," she said thoughtfully, "I'd make sure no child in this neighborhood had to leave school to work. Second, I'd build a health center where mothers wouldn't have to choose between buying medicine and buying food." She paused, looking out the window toward the streets where she had grown up and lived her entire life. "But most importantly," she continued, "I'd make sure people felt they were worth something. Because the problem with poverty isn't just not having money. It's that they make you feel you don't deserve to have it." Alejandro felt as if a ray of clarity had pierced through his confusion. This woman, with her worn apron and hands weathered by work, had just described exactly what he had seen in Amina's eyes, dignity wounded but not broken. "What's your name?" he asked. "Carmen," she replied with a smile. "And you?" "Alejandro. And I think you just helped me make the most important decision of my life." Carmen nodded as if she had been expecting that answer all night. "Good decisions always hurt at first," she told him, getting up to serve another customer. "But later, when you look in the mirror, you recognize the man you see." The decision. Breaking with the past. The next morning, Alejandro called Isabel before breakfast. He didn't want to postpone a conversation he knew would be definitive. "We need to talk," he told her when she answered with a sleepy voice. "Alejandro, it's 7 in the morning. Can't it wait until a civilized hour? I've been thinking all night and there's something I need to tell you now." Isabel arrived an hour later at Alejandro's Madrid apartment, dressed impeccably as always, but with an expression suggesting she already sensed what the conversation was about. "Do you want coffee?" Alejandro offered. "I'd prefer you get to the point," she replied, sitting on the Italian leather sofa with the rigidity of someone preparing for bad news. Alejandro sat across from her, and for the first time in 5 years of relationship, he really looked at her. Isabel was objectively beautiful. Perfect blonde hair, flawless makeup, designer clothes that enhanced a figure maintained with personal trainers and expensive treatments. She was exactly the type of woman expected to be chosen by a man in his position. But as he observed her, he realized he felt nothing real for her. It was like looking at an expensive work of art. He could appreciate the technical beauty, but there was no emotional connection. "Isabel," he began, "I think we should end our engagement." She didn't seem surprised, just annoyed. "Because of that woman from the beach?" she asked directly. Alejandro blinked, surprised by the question. "How do you know about—" "Please, Alejandro. Marbella is a small town. Do you think nobody saw when you took that person to the yacht club, or when you went to her neighborhood?" The way she said "that person" made Alejandro feel nauseous. "This isn't about Amina," he said, though as he pronounced her name he realized he was partially lying. "It's about me, about who I've discovered I really am." "And who are you really?" Isabel asked sarcastically. "Robin Hood? The savior of the poor?" "I'm someone who wants his life to have meaning," Alejandro replied calmly. "Someone who wants to fall asleep at night knowing his existence makes the world a better place." Isabel got up and walked to the window, her heels clicking against the marble like a clock marking the end of something. "Alejandro," she said without turning around, "you're 35 years old. It's normal to go through an existential crisis, but that doesn't mean you should destroy your real life for a romantic fantasy." "My real life?" Alejandro approached her. "Isabel, tell me, when was the last time we did something meaningful together? When was the last time we talked about something that wasn't money, properties or parties?" Isabel turned toward him, and for the first time, Alejandro saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "We talked about our future," she said softly. "About the children we would have, the houses we would buy." "We talked about a script," Alejandro corrected, "about the role we were supposed to play, but we never talked about who we really are when nobody's watching." Isabel approached him and put her hands on his chest, a gesture she had made thousands of times but which now felt like acting. "Alejandro, I know you're confused. That woman saved your life and you feel indebted. It's understandable. But you can't base the rest of your existence on a moment of gratitude. It's not gratitude, Alejandro said, taking her hands but not returning the embrace. It's awakening. It's realizing I've lived 35 years on autopilot, following a plan other people wrote for me. And what's your plan now? Isabel asked, withdrawing her hands. Marry the shell collector and live in a fisherman's cottage? The irony in her voice was like acid. My plan is to create something beautiful, Alejandro replied. My plan is to use my fortune to give opportunities to people who deserve them. My plan is to be able to look at myself in the mirror and feel pride instead of emptiness. Isabel looked at him for a long moment, and Alejandro saw the exact instant when she accepted she had lost. Very well, she finally said, with the cold dignity of someone raised to never show weakness in public. But when you get tired of playing saint and want to return to real life, I won't be waiting for you. She headed toward the door, but stopped before leaving. By the way, she added without turning around, Daddy says if you go ahead with your charity project, he'll withdraw all his investments from your companies. And you know, Daddy, when he says something, he follows through. The door closed with a soft sound that resonated like the end of an era. Amina's test. That afternoon, Alejandro drove to the beach where he had met Amina. He found her, as always, searching for shells under the relentless sun. But something was different. Her posture, her energy. There was a sadness in her he hadn't seen before. Hello, he greeted her, approaching cautiously. Amina looked up, and Alejandro saw she had been crying. Hello, she replied, without the smile that usually illuminated her face. What's wrong? Alejandro asked, sitting in the sand beside her. Amina continued collecting shells in silence for several minutes. Finally, when her bucket was half full, she also sat down and looked at him with those deep eyes that seemed to see directly into the soul. People have come asking about me, she finally said. What kind of people? Elegant people, in expensive cars, asking about my relationship with you. Alejandro's stomach contracted. He already knew where this conversation was heading. What did you tell them? The truth, that you saved my mother's life and offered me work running a school. Amina dropped a shell into the bucket with more force than necessary. But they also told me other things, she continued. They told me you're engaged, that you have a completely different life in Madrid, that for you this is just... She didn't finish the sentence, but Alejandro understood perfectly. Amina, look at me, he said, gently taking her chin so their eyes would meet. Do you really believe I'm playing with you? I don't know what to believe, she replied with disarming honesty. You're a rich and powerful man who appeared in my life like a gift from heaven. Women like me don't usually have happy endings with men like you. And if I weren't a rich man? Alejandro asked. If I were just Alejandro without a surname, without money, without a company, what would you feel then? Amina looked at him for a long moment, as if evaluating not just his words, but his very soul. I would feel I'd met the bravest man who exists, she finally said, because anyone can be good when they have nothing to lose, but someone who risks everything to do what's right, that's true courage. Then let me show you what kind of man I really am, Alejandro said, standing up and extending his hand. How? Come with me. There's something I want to show you. The Amina Foundation. Alejandro took her to the outskirts of Marbella, to a vacant lot of 5 hectares he had bought years earlier for a real estate development that never materialized. He parked the car and they walked to the center of the land, where they could see the entire expanse stretching toward the mountains. What is this place? Amina asked. The future, Alejandro replied, taking rolled plans from his briefcase. He spread them on the car's hood, showing detailed architectural designs. It's the Amina Foundation, he said simply. Amina was breathless as she examined the plans. There were schools, a health center, sports facilities, a community dining hall, dormitories for families in transition, professional training workshops. The Amina Foundation? She murmured. A complete educational campus, Alejandro explained, pointing to each area of the design. From preschool to university training, but not just for children, also for adults who want to finish their studies, learn trades, get a second chance. Amina kept looking at the plans as if they were a dream she feared would vanish at the touch. Alejandro, this must cost... 100 million euros, he said. All my personal wealth, plus profits from the next 5 years of the company. All your wealth? Amina looked at him with alarm. But then I'll live like a normal person, Alejandro finished with a smile. I'll have a modest house, a job I like, a meaningful life. Doesn't that seem like a fair trade? Amina stepped away from the plans and walked several meters, turning her back to him. Alejandro could see her shoulders trembling. Why are you naming it after me? She asked without turning around. Because you taught me that true wealth isn't counted in euros, Alejandro replied, approaching but not touching her. Because you saved my life in 2 ways. You pulled me from the sea and showed me who I could really be. Amina turned toward him, and Alejandro saw she was crying, but these were different tears, not of sadness or frustration, but of something much deeper. What if I fail? She asked. What if I'm not good enough to run something like this? Then we'll fail together, Alejandro said, taking her hands. But I'd rather fail trying something great than succeed at something empty. Amina looked once more at the plans, then at the land, then at Alejandro. Are you really willing to change your entire life for this? I already changed it, he replied. The day I decided to listen to you instead of just hearing you. The day I decided to be the man you saw in me when you pulled me from the water. And your fiancé? Your partners? My fiancé left me this morning, Alejandro said without bitterness. And my partners? Well, we'll discover if principles can be more profitable than profits. Amina approached him until their faces were centimeters apart. Do you know what scares me most about all this? She asked in a low voice. What? That I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, and that for the first time in my life, I believe I deserve to be loved. Alejandro felt as if his heart would explode with happiness. I already fell in love with you, he confessed, the day you saved me not just from the sea, but from a life without purpose. They kissed under the afternoon sun, on vacant land that would soon become a seed of hope for hundreds of families, and for the first time in decades, Alejandro felt he was exactly where he should be, returned to the beach. 2 years later, Alejandro and Amina walked along the same beach where they had met, but everything had changed. The sun still fell with the same intensity, the sand still burned under their feet, the waves still reached the shore with their eternal rhythm. But they were no longer the same people who had encountered each other in those waters. Alejandro wore a simple shirt, comfortable pants, shoes he had bought at a normal store. His watch no longer cost 5 years' salary for a worker. It was a simple one that Yusuf, Amina's brother, had given him when he graduated from high school, thanks to the scholarship he had earned at the foundation. Amina walked beside him in a simple but elegant dress, her hair pulled back in a braid that swayed with her step. But what was most different was her posture. She no longer walked with the slightly bowed head of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Now she walked with the dignity of someone who knows her voice matters, that her ideas have value, that her life makes a difference. Do you regret it? Amina asked him, stopping at the exact place where she had saved him 2 years earlier. Alejandro looked at her with genuine surprise. Regret what? Everything. Changing your life, losing your friends, living with less money. Alejandro smiled, and Amina saw in that smile the man who had learned to be truly happy. Amina, 2 years ago I had 500 million euros and felt like the poorest man in the world. Now I have a modest house, a job I love, an extraordinary woman by my side, and 300 children who call me Professor Alejandro when I visit the schools. He approached the water and let the waves wet his bare feet. Before, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger dressed in success. Now I see the man I always wanted to be. Amina joined him at the water's edge. The water was perfect, like that morning that changed their destinies. Do you know what's most beautiful about everything? She said. What? That you didn't save me. We saved each other. Alejandro nodded. It was true. The Amina Foundation had grown beyond their most ambitious dreams. 5 schools, 2 health centers, a microcredit program that had helped 50 families create their own businesses. But more important than the numbers was what couldn't be measured: restored hope, the smiles of children who now believed in their futures, the tears of mothers who saw their children graduate. "There's something I want to ask you," Alejandro said suddenly. "What?" He knelt in the sand in the same place where he had been unconscious after she saved him. He took from his pocket a simple ring, without expensive diamonds or precious metals, but with an inscription that read, "Where the sea unites destinies." "Amina," he said with a voice trembling with emotion, "will you marry me? Not my money, not my surname, but me. The man you helped me find." Amina brought her hands to her mouth, with tears running down her cheeks like rivers of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want to marry you." The brave man who decided to change the world starting with himself. They kissed while the waves applauded at their feet, and the sun blessed them with its golden light. In the distance, some tourists took photos of the romantic couple on the beach, not knowing they were capturing a moment that represented much more than love. It represented proof that a single brave decision can transform destinies, and that sometimes the real treasure isn't buried in the sand, but in the courage to be who we really are. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors no artist could imitate, Alejandro and Amina sat on the sand, looking at the infinite horizon where the sea met the sky. "Do you know what I like most about this moment?" Amina said, resting her head on Alejandro's shoulder. "What?" "That 2 years ago when I pulled you from these waters, neither of us knew where destiny would take us. We only knew we had to do the right thing." Alejandro nodded, thinking about all the crucial moments that had led them there. Every difficult decision, every closed door, every person who had judged or abandoned them. Everything had been necessary to reach this moment of perfect peace. "Amina," he said suddenly, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." She sat up to look into his eyes. "The night before I met you, I stood on my yacht's terrace, looking at these same waters, and for the first time in my adult life I seriously thought about ending it all." Amina felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Really? My life felt like a golden cage. I had everything I was supposed to want, but felt nothing real. It was like being dead while alive." Alejandro took sand between his fingers and let it slowly trickle out. "That morning, when I decided to swim so far, I think I was unconsciously testing fate, hoping something, anything, would give me a reason to keep living. And then I appeared," Amina murmured. "And then you appeared," he confirmed, looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "You didn't just save me from drowning, Amina. You saved me from a life that wasn't worth living." They remained silent for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what he had just confessed. The sound of the waves filled the space between them like a whispered prayer. "Do you know what I believe?" Amina finally said. "What?" "I believe the sea brought us together that day because we both needed to be rescued. You from the emptiness of having too much, me from the pain of having too little, and together we found the perfect balance." Alejandro kissed her softly, savoring the wisdom of her words. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you for saving me, for challenging me, for showing me that true wealth is measured in lives touched, not bank accounts." "And I love you for having the courage to change," Amina replied, "for risking everything you had for something you didn't even know would work." As the last ray of sun disappeared on the horizon, they stood up and began walking back, hand in hand. Their shadows stretched across the sand like promises of a shared future. "Alejandro," Amina said when they reached the path leading back to the city. "Yes?" "Tomorrow the first 100 students arrive at the People's University we just opened." "I know," he smiled. "Adults who never had the chance to study for a degree, single mothers who want to be doctors, workers who dream of being engineers. It's like we're planting an entire forest," Amina said with excitement. "Each student is a tree that will bear fruit for generations." "And do you know what's best?" Alejandro asked. "What?" "That this is just the beginning. Next year we'll open the Amina Foundation in Valencia. In 5 years we want to reach all of Spain. In 10 years we'll have proven that a more just world isn't a utopia," Amina finished. "It's a decision made one person at a time." They stopped one last time to look back, toward the beach that had witnessed their miraculous encounter. The city lights were beginning to turn on, each one representing a family, a dream, a hope they might perhaps help fulfill. "Do you have any advice for people watching this story?" Alejandro asked, as if addressing the viewers directly following their tale. Amina smiled, understanding this was the moment to share the most important lesson they had learned. "Yes," she said, looking straight ahead, as if she could see through time and space to reach every heart that needed to hear her words. If you're watching this story and feel your life has no meaning, if you feel you have too much or too little, if you feel the world is unfair and you can't do anything to change it, remember this." She paused, carefully choosing her words. "You don't need to save yourself from the sea to save a life. You don't need millions of euros to change the world. You just need to see another person as what they really are, a human being who deserves dignity, opportunities, and love. And if you have privileges, use them to open doors," Alejandro added. "If you don't have them, don't let that convince you that you're worthless. Every person on this planet has something unique to offer." "The most beautiful thing," Amina continued, "is that when you help someone else shine, you also light up. When you lift others, you also rise. It's the only equation in the world where 1 + 1 = infinity." Alejandro nodded, feeling the deep truth of those words in every cell of his body. "And if you ever doubt whether your actions matter," he said, "remember that 2 years ago, a poor woman and a rich man met on a beach. Today, 300 children are studying instead of working. 50 families have their own businesses, and 2 people who felt lost in the world found their purpose. All because someone decided to do the right thing at the right moment," Amina concluded. They walked in silence toward their future, but their words remained floating in the night air like seeds carried by the wind, waiting to find fertile ground in hearts ready to change. Because that's the magic of true stories. They don't end when the telling is finished. They continue in every person who decides to be better, in every extended hand to help, in every heart that chooses love over indifference. The sea continued singing its eternal song, keeping forever the secret of how 2 destinies had intertwined to create something beautiful. And somewhere in the world, someone else was about to make the decision that would change everything. And now, dear viewer, the question is for you. What would you do if you had the opportunity to save a life? If you could change someone's destiny with a simple decision, the story of Alejandro and Amina isn't just fiction. It's a mirror where you can see your own possibilities reflected. Because all of us, regardless of our economic situation, have the power to touch lives, to create hope, to be the difference someone else needs. Did this story inspire you? Did it make you reflect on your own life and the decisions you make every day? Then your mission is clear. Hit subscribe to this channel right now, because we need to create a community of people who believe in the power of transformation. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, leave us in the comments what lesson you're taking away and how you're going to apply it in your life. Because here we don't just tell stories, we plant seeds of change. And your voice, your experience, your decision to be better matters more than you imagine. Your transformation starts now. Subscribe, share, and tell us your story.